Maui's backstory in Moana may have been briefly glossed over, but it still proved to be one of the more tragic moments throughout the entire movie. It turns out that Moana's telling of Maui's origin was pretty accurate when compared to the Maui myth that the character was based on, and thanks to that myth, it was easy to learn more about the circumstances around Maui's tragic birth, and why his origin story was one of the darkest in Disney's history, even though he made it sound impressive in the film. Disney's Moana painted Maui's origin as a tragic tale, but they really didn't go into extensive detail. The most information about where the demigod came from came when he was on the boat with Moana sailing toward Te Fiti. After being humbled by the difficulty of traveling the sea, Moana explained to Maui that her island was dying and that she needed to return the heart back to its rightful place, despite not knowing why the ocean chose her. This caused Maui to feel comfortable opening up a bit, and he shared a small portion of his tragic birth story, which was only the start of his sad history. Maui explained to Moana that before he was a demigod, he was born to human parents. And, according to him, they took one look at him and decided that they didn't want him. Maui's parents threw him into the sea and left him to die. In Disney's telling of the story, Maui was saved by the gods, who ended up giving him the magical hook that he used to complete the many amazing feats that he sang about in You're Welcome. And that's sort of where his origin ended in the Disney movie. However, looking at the ancient legend that Maui was based on, it's clear that Disney merely scraped the surface of Maui's tragic life. Now, according to Maui lore, the circumstances surrounding Maui's birth and his near death in the sea are very similar to how the movie told the story, only the myth delves a bit deeper into why his parents threw him into the sea in the first place. Maui mythology is full of fantastic stories depicting the origins of the world known to the pre-European Maui people. In that lore, the majority of humans during the time of the gods were the offspring of Tumatuanga, that then multiplied and began to populate the world around them. According to legend, Maui was the son of Makeatutala, a guardian of the underworld, and his wife Talanga. Now, despite both of Maui's parents being powerful according to the myths, Maui's life didn't come without disaster. Despite having 4 sons and a daughter before Maui without any complications, Talanga wasn't as lucky when it came to the birth of their last born. In Maui mythology, Maui was born prematurely, and at that time there hadn't been any sign of death in the world, so, not knowing what to do, Talanga decided to give her last-born son back to the sea, which had helped her people survive for as long as they had. She cut off a tress of her hair from her top knot, also known as a tiki-tiki, wrapped it around her son, named him Maui Tiki-Tiki e Talanga, and dropped him into the ocean, which was the first tragedy that Maui faced on his road to becoming the demigod that Moana showed him to be. Much like in Moana, Maui, a premature infant, began sinking down toward the bottom of the sea, but according to the myths, and Maui in the Disney movie, after being cast into the sea, the ocean spirits, or gods, saved him. In the myth, it's believed that the ocean spirits wrapped Maui in seaweed and jellyfish, and that they cared for him until a storm finally took him back to the beach where he was found by his grandfather, Tamanui ki te Langi. Langi saw Maui's body on the beach as it was covered by a swarm of seagulls and flies, and he proceeded to care for the child much as the ocean spirits had. And according to the lore, Langi raised Maui until he was an adolescent. Even though the demigod ended up in the care of his grandfather, it's still hard to deny that Maui's life was off to a rough start, much like his character in Moana expressed. One of the few good outcomes in Maui's life came when he finally set out to reunite with his family, although that would end up leading to something much worse for the demigod. In the Maui legend, when Maui was old enough, he left his grandfather and traveled back to his family's home. It was there that he first laid eyes on his 4 brothers, who all share the first portions of his name, Maui, and his sister Hina. None of his siblings recognized Maui at first, and it wasn't until later that night that he finally met one of his parents, and despite being tragically thrown into the sea, Maui was happy to finally meet his mother Talanga. According to the myth, when she first saw Maui, she thought he was a stranger in her home and demanded that he leave. However, he was able to prove that he was indeed her child, and he was eventually welcomed into their family. Maui's siblings were weary of him at first, but once Maui began to display magical abilities that were bestowed on him by the ocean spirits, they quickly began to admire their younger brother. Now, this little bit of happiness for Maui was a nice change for the demigod, but it wouldn't last long. Despite being reunited with his brothers and sister, Maui's family still wasn't quite whole, as the demigod still didn't know who his father was. But according to Maui legend, that discovery was what not only sealed his fate, but also that of all humankind. You see, after being welcomed back into his family by Talanga, Maui soon began to notice a pattern that his mother followed. He noticed that she would often leave their house before dawn in the morning, and then not return until nightfall. For some reason, according to the myth, that bothered Maui, and he did everything that he could to find out where his mother had been sneaking off to. Little did he know, what he discovered would only lead to another tragic outcome in his life. One day, Maui blocked all of the entrances of their house to make sure that no light could leak in and delay Talanga's trip. And as the myth tells it, Maui then waited for his mother to make her journey under the light of day. The sunlight made it much easier for Maui to follow his mother, and after transforming into a kelelu, or New Zealand pigeon, he followed her to a hole in the ground that was covered up by tussock, or thick grass. Maui watched his mom pull up a clump of the grass and then descend into the hole, and according to legend, Maui followed her. The hole in the ground led Maui and Talanga to the underworld, where he saw his mother sitting with a group of people. It was then that Maui revealed himself to Talanga, who welcomed him into the underworld and then finally introduced her son to his father. But Maui meeting Makeatutala would end up leading to arguably the biggest tragedy in Maui's life. In Maui lore, the demigod's father introduced himself as the guardian of the underworld, and then performed a ritual for his son that was intended to protect Maui and help him hone his powers. But Maui's father didn't do the ritual properly, and because of mistakes that he made during the incantation, he sealed his son's tragic fate. Perhaps Maui's biggest and most tragic failure came at the end of his life, when he tried to give himself and mankind immortality. Much like in Moana, the ancient Maui myths claimed that the demigod was responsible for performing some amazing feats for mankind. Legend has it that Maui was the one who used his hook to slow the rate that the sun crossed the sky, allowing humans to have more time to work during the day. He was also supposedly responsible for dragging up land from down below the surface of the water and turning them into islands. In other words, Maui was performing godlike acts, which is why he couldn't see when he was heading towards tragedy. And according to both mythology and Disney's Moana, following all of his earlier exploits, Maui thought that he was ready to gift humans with immortality. But to do so, he would have to defeat his ancestress, Hinenui Tepo, the goddess of the night. Now in Moana, the closest thing to Hine that they showed was the goddess Te Fiti. And much like Te Fiti protected her heart, which was made out of a green stone, Hine's eyes were made from green stone. And after Maui learned that he would have to defeat Hine to grant mankind immortality, he set off on his journey. Unbeknownst to him was the fact that this would also be his last adventure, and that much like in Moana, it was going to end in failure. According to the legend, Maui set off with a group of companions which, in some versions of the myth, were his brothers, and in others were a group of small birds. The group set out to find Hine, and once they found her, Maui disclosed his plan. Maui intended on going through the body of Hine as she slept, and claimed that once he came out of her mouth, she would die. But due to his companions, Maui never made it that far, and instead put an end to his tragic story. You see, in the myth, Maui warned his companions not to make a sound while he tried to make his way through his ancestor. But considering where he was entering, his companions couldn't help but laugh. And according to the legend, this laughter caused Hine to wake up, and without getting too graphic, she cut Maui in half. And thus, Maui became the first being to die, and mankind was forever left as mortals. Now, even though that's where the legend differs from the version of the story in Moana, the result is almost the same. In Moana, Maui failed to take the heart of Te Fiti while the goddess slept, and after waking her up, he and her heart were lost to the sea. And, as Disney's Moana depicted, humans then grew to despise Maui and considered him an irresponsible god. What do you think about Maui's backstory according to Maui legend? Do you think it lines up with the story we learned from Moana? Make sure you let us know in the comments below.